You can sit over there. This table's for actual family." My nephew sneered, gesturing toward a stool by the restroom. Everyone chuckled while I ate in silence. Then the cake, catering, and venue invoice landed, $4, $200. The planner approached me. I just sipped my drink and announced, "Ask the actual family." I, 42M, never thought I'd be writing this, but here we are. What happened at my nephew's birthday party 3 weeks ago still has me shaking with anger, and honestly, I'm not even sorry for how it all played out. My sister and I have always had a complicated relationship. She's 5 years younger, and ever since she married into money 15 years ago, she's acted like she's better than everyone else. Her husband runs some tech startup that got lucky during the pandemic, and suddenly they're living in a mansion with a pool and looking down on the rest of us who still work regular jobs. I'm a mechanic, good at what I do, make decent money, but nothing fancy. I've been helping my sister's family for years whenever they needed it. When they were starting out and broke, I loaned them $3,000 for their wedding. When their first kid was born and they couldn't afford the hospital bills, I covered $2,000. When they needed someone to watch the kids during emergencies, I was always there. Never asked for the money back, never complained about the late-night calls. Their oldest just turned 16, and my sister decided to throw him this massive birthday party. We're talking rented venue, professional catering, DJ, the works. She called me 2 weeks before and asked if I could help with some of the costs. The way she explained it, they were a bit stretched thin because of some business investments. And could I maybe chip in for the catering? I said sure, thinking maybe a few $100. Then she tells me it's $4,200 total, and she was hoping I could cover the whole thing. I almost choked. That's more than I make in a month after taxes. But she started talking about how this was her baby's sweet 16, how all his friends from the private school would be there, how important this was for the family image. She laid it on thick about how I'm the only one she could trust, how family needs to stick together. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Wiped out most of my savings, but I figured this was my nephew we were talking about. I love that kid, or at least I thought I did. The party was last Saturday. I showed up in my best clothes, which admittedly aren't designer labels, but they were clean and pressed. The venue was this upscale place downtown, all marble floors and crystal chandeliers. I felt out of place immediately, but I tried to shake it off. My sister greeted me at the door with this tight smile and thanked me for coming. She didn't mention the money, didn't acknowledge what I'd done to make this whole thing possible, just pointed me toward the back where the family tables were set up. That's when I saw the seating arrangement. There were 3 big round tables with white tablecloths and fancy centerpieces. Extended family, family friends, my nephew's classmates and their parents. Everyone dressed to the nines, laughing and having a good time. Then I noticed there was a small cocktail table off to the side, near the restrooms, with just a single bar stool. I walked over to the main tables, assuming I'd find my place card somewhere. My sister intercepted me before I could get close. She told me that seating was tight, and they'd had to make some adjustments. She gestured toward the tiny table by the bathroom and said that's where I'd be sitting. I stared at her, thinking she was joking, but her expression was dead serious. I asked her why I couldn't sit with the family, and she got this embarrassed look on her face. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then told me that her husband's business partners were here, along with some important clients, and they needed to maintain a certain image. The implication hit me like a truck. I wasn't good enough to sit with the real family. My work clothes, my blue-collar job, my lack of college education. I was an embarrassment they needed to hide. But it gets worse. As I'm standing there trying to process this, my nephew walks over. This kid I've known since he was born, who I've taken to baseball games and bought Christmas presents for every year. He looks me up and down with this smirk and tells me that his mom explained the situation. He says I can sit over there, gesturing toward the stool by the restroom, because this table is for actual family. The way he said it, with this condescending tone he'd clearly picked up from his parents, made my blood boil. But what really killed me was that everyone at the nearby tables heard him and started chuckling, like it was some kind of joke. My own family, laughing at my humiliation. I wanted to leave right then. Every instinct told me to walk out and never speak to any of them again. But I'd already paid for this whole thing, and I couldn't bring myself to make a scene in front of all these people. So I swallowed my pride and went to sit on that damn stool. For the next 2 hours, I sat by myself while everyone else enjoyed the party I'd paid for. The food was incredible: prime rib, lobster, all kinds of fancy appetizers. The cake was this 4-tier masterpiece that probably cost more than I spend on groceries in a month. The DJ was playing all the kids' favorite songs, and everyone was dancing and having the time of their lives. And there I was, eating off a paper plate at a cocktail table, watching through the crowd like some kind of outsider. A few relatives came over to say hello, but the conversations were awkward and brief. Everyone could see where I was sitting. Everyone understood what it meant. The breaking point came during the cake ceremony. My nephew gave this speech thanking everyone for coming, thanking his parents for throwing such an amazing party, thanking his friends for being there. He thanked his grandparents, his cousins, even his friends' parents for their support. Never once mentioned me. Never acknowledged that without my money, none of this would have been possible. I sat there listening to him talk about family and gratitude while I was literally hidden in the corner like a dirty secret. That's when I knew I was done with all of them. The party was winding down when the event coordinator approached my sister with the final invoice. For $1,200, just like we discussed. But here's where my sister's arrogance really showed. She started looking around frantically, clearly having assumed I'd handle the payment quietly in the background like some kind of anonymous donor. The coordinator was getting impatient, asking who would be settling the bill. My sister's face went red as she realized the position she'd put herself in. She couldn't pay it. I knew her financial situation better than anyone. All those business investments she'd mentioned were actually debts they were struggling with. The fancy house, the cars, the private school, it was all leveraged to the hilt. That's when she looked over at me with this expectant expression, like I was supposed to jump up and save her from embarrassment. The coordinator followed her gaze and started walking toward my little table by the bathroom. I'll never forget that moment. The coordinator approached me with the invoice, and I could feel everyone's eyes on us. The whole party seemed to pause as people realized what was happening. My sister was standing there with this panicked look, probably praying I'd handle it discreetly. Instead, I took a long sip of my drink, looked the coordinator dead in the eye, and told her she'd need to ask the actual family about payment. I gestured toward the main tables where all the important people were sitting. The silence that followed was deafening. You could have heard a pin drop in that fancy venue. My sister's face went from red to white in about 2 seconds. My brother-in-law started walking over, clearly trying to do damage control, but the damage was already done. The coordinator was confused and asked for clarification. I explained very calmly that I was just a guest, sitting over here by the restrooms, because I wasn't real family. I suggested she check with the people at the family tables about who was responsible for the bill. That's when my nephew, the birthday boy himself, realized what was happening. The smug look disappeared from his face as he understood that his little joke about actual family was about to cost him everything. The party he'd been bragging about to his private school friends was about to become a public humiliation. My sister tried to pull me aside, but I wasn't having it. I stood up, thanked her for the lovely evening, and started walking toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear frantic whispers as my brother-in-law tried to figure out how they were going to come up with $4,000 on the spot. The coordinator was now talking to my sister directly, explaining that the venue required immediate payment and that they'd need to contact security if there was a problem. Some of the business partners my sister had been so eager to impress were starting to notice the commotion. I made it to the parking lot before my sister caught up with me. She was practically in tears, begging me to come back and pay the bill. She promised she'd make it right, said she'd talk to my nephew about his attitude, offered to pay me back within a month. I told her it was too late for that. The damage was done. She'd made her choice when she decided I wasn't good enough to sit with the family, and now she could live with the consequences. She kept pleading, saying I was ruining her son's birthday, that I was embarrassing them in front of important people. I reminded her that she'd already ruined the birthday when she decided to humiliate me in front of those same people. I told her that actions have consequences, and this was hers. I drove home that night feeling a mixture of anger and satisfaction. Part of me felt bad for my nephew. He's still a kid, even if he's old enough to know better. But the bigger part of me was glad I'd finally stood up for myself after years of being treated like a second-class family member. Update 1. The fallout has been intense. My phone started ringing at 7 a.m. the next morning. First my sister, then my brother-in-law, then my parents who'd somehow gotten word about what happened. Everyone had an opinion about what I'd done. My parents were furious with me. They said I'd embarrassed the family and acted like a child. They couldn't understand why I'd made such a big deal over seating arrangements. When I tried to explain that it wasn't about the chair, it was about the blatant disrespect, they brushed it off. They said I should have been the bigger person and paid the bill to avoid a scene. I asked them if they knew I'd paid for the entire party. Turns out my sister had told them she was splitting the costs with me, not that I was covering the whole thing. When I told them the real number, for $1,200, my dad went quiet. My mom asked why I'd agreed to pay that much if I was just going to cause problems later. That's when I realized they didn't get it either. In their minds, I was the family member with no wife, no kids, no major expenses. Of course I should be the one paying for things. Of course I should be grateful just to be included, even if it meant sitting by the bathroom. My brother-in-law called Tuesday morning. He was furious but trying to stay controlled. He told me that the party had been ruined, that they'd had to scramble to get payments sorted out, and that several important business relationships had been damaged by the scene I'd caused. I asked him how they'd eventually handled the bill. Turns out they'd had to call his parents, who lived 3 hours away, and beg them to drive over with cash. His parents had to leave their own weekend plans, rush to the bank, and show up at the venue like some kind of emergency bailout team. The whole thing took over an hour, during which time the venue staff was getting increasingly agitated and some of the guests started leaving. He demanded I pay them back for the humiliation. I told him I'd already paid for $1,200 worth. If he wanted to talk about humiliation, we could start with how they'd treated me at the party. The really interesting call came from my nephew on Wednesday. He was calling from school, probably during lunch break, and he sounded different. Younger, less cocky. He said he'd been thinking about what happened and wanted to apologize. He told me that some of his friends had been asking questions about the party, specifically about why it had ended so awkwardly. Word was getting around school that there had been some kind of family drama over money. He was embarrassed that his perfect party had become gossip material. But more than that, he said he'd been talking to one of his friends whose uncle had helped pay for his car. The friend had been shocked when my nephew mentioned how he'd talked to me at the party. The friend told him that was incredibly disrespectful, especially to someone who was helping the family financially. I could hear in his voice that he was genuinely sorry, but I wasn't ready to forgive him yet. I told him that apologies were nice, but they didn't change what had happened. He'd shown me exactly what he thought of me, and I wasn't going to forget that anytime soon. He asked if there was anything he could do to make it right. I told him he could start by thinking about how his words affect people, and by remembering that treating family members like garbage has consequences. Update 2. Things have gotten more complicated. My sister showed up at my house Friday evening, and she looked terrible. Apparently, the business partners who were at the party have been asking questions about their financial situation. The whole payment fiasco raised red flags about their cash flow, and now there are concerns about some ongoing deals. She broke down and admitted that they're in much worse financial shape than they've been letting on. The business has been struggling for months, and they've been using credit cards and loans to maintain their lifestyle. The party was supposed to be a way to project success and keep the business relationship strong. I almost felt sorry for her until she started talking about how I'd sabotaged her family's future. She said that one conversation with a potential investor fell through specifically because of questions about their financial stability. She blamed me for being petty and vindictive instead of supporting the family. I reminded her that I had supported the family to the tune of $4,000. I'd also supported them for years with loans, babysitting, and whatever else they needed. But when it came time to show me basic respect, they'd failed completely. She tried a different approach, talking about how we needed to think about the kids. My nephew was struggling at school because of rumors about the party. The younger kids didn't understand why Uncle wouldn't come to family dinners anymore. She painted a picture of a family falling apart because of my stubbornness. I told her the family had fallen apart the moment they decided I wasn't good enough to sit with them. Everything else was just consequences. But she dropped a bombshell that I wasn't expecting. Apparently, my parents have been talking about changing their will. They're disappointed in how I handled the situation and are considering leaving more of their assets to my sister's family instead of splitting things equally between us. That hit harder than I expected. Not because of the money, but because it showed how deep this divide had become. My parents saw me as the problem, not the victim. In their minds, I'd chosen money over family, when really I'd chosen self-respect over enabling bad behavior. My sister could see the impact her words had, and she pressed her advantage. She said it wasn't too late to fix things. If I apologized to my nephew and maybe helped them through their current financial rough patch, we could all move forward as a family. I asked her what she meant by helping them through their rough patch. She got vague, but eventually admitted they were behind on the house payments and could use a loan to get caught up. Maybe $10,000, just until the business turned around. That's when I knew this whole apology tour was just another attempt to get money from me. The tears, the guilt trips, the threats about the will. It was all manipulation to get me to open my wallet again. I told her to leave. She tried to argue, but I was done listening. As she was walking to her car, she turned around and told me I was making a huge mistake. She said family was more important than pride, and I was going to regret burning these bridges. I told her that some bridges deserve to be burned. Update 3. The last 2 weeks have been the most peaceful I've had in years. No emergency calls about babysitting. No requests for loans. No family drama demanding my attention and resources. Just me, my work, and my own life. I've had time to think about everything that's happened, and I realized this situation was a long time coming. I'd been enabling their behavior for years, always being the reliable uncle who'd bail them out of whatever mess they'd created. In their minds, I wasn't a person with my own needs and feelings. I was a resource to be used. The party was just the final straw. They'd taken my money, excluded me from the family, humiliated me in public, and expected me to smile and take it. When I finally stood up for myself, suddenly I was the villain in their story. My nephew called again last Sunday. This time he sounded different, more mature, less entitled. He told me he'd been doing some research about family dynamics and had started to understand why what happened was so wrong. He'd also been talking to his guidance counselor at school about the situation. He said he wanted to make a real apology, not just words but actions. He was planning to get a part-time job and save up money to pay me back for the party. He knew it would take a long time at minimum wage, but he wanted to do it anyway. I was surprised by his initiative, but I told him the money wasn't really the point anymore. It was about respect and how people treat each other. I appreciated his gesture, but what I really wanted was for him to understand that his words had consequences. He asked if there was any way we could rebuild our relationship. I told him that was possible, but it would take time and consistent behavior, not grand gestures. He said he understood and that he was willing to work for it. His mother, on the other hand, seems to have given up on reconciliation and moved into full attack mode. I've heard through mutual friends that she's been telling people I'm mentally unstable and jealous of their success. She's painting herself as the victim of an unhinged family member who's trying to destroy their lives. My parents called yesterday with an ultimatum. They want me to come to Sunday dinner this week and hash things out with my sister. They're tired of the family being divided and think we need to work through our issues like adults. I told them I'd be happy to have a conversation, but only if my sister was prepared to acknowledge what she'd done wrong and make genuine changes. They said I was being unreasonable and that families are supposed to forgive each other. I asked them if they'd be willing to forgive someone who humiliated them in public after they'd paid thousands of dollars for a party. They said that was different because family obligations are more important than personal slights. That's when I realized they'd never understand. In their generation, family hierarchy meant everything. The successful child gets priority, and everyone else falls in line. The idea that I might have legitimate grievances worth addressing was foreign to them. I declined their dinner invitation. They said they were disappointed, but not surprised. They'd already started treating me like the black sheep of the family, so this just confirmed their expectations. But here's the thing, I'm not sorry anymore. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm living authentically instead of just trying to please everyone else. I'm not walking on eggshells, wondering when the next crisis will require my money or time. I'm not being taken for granted or treated like a second-class family member. The business my brother-in-law runs apparently folded last week. The financial stress from their debt situation, combined with the damaged relationships from the party incident, finally caught up with them. They're planning to sell the house and move in with his parents while they figure out their next steps. Part of me feels bad for the kids, who didn't choose any of this. But I also know that staying in an enabling relationship wouldn't have helped them in the long run. Sometimes people need to face the real consequences of their choices before they can learn and grow. My sister sent me a text message yesterday. Just 4 words. I hope you're happy. I looked at it for a long time before responding. Finally, I wrote back. I'm getting there. And I am. For the first time in years, I'm prioritizing my own well-being instead of everyone else's problems. I'm saving money for things I want instead of constantly bailing out family members. I'm building relationships with people who respect me instead of just tolerate me. The funny thing is, I think my nephew might end up being the only family member who learns something valuable from this whole mess. He's experiencing real consequences for his actions, and he's trying to make things right through effort rather than manipulation. That gives me hope that maybe, someday, we can have a genuine relationship built on mutual respect. As for the rest of them, my sister, my brother-in-law, my parents, they're still living in a world where family status determines treatment, where money can buy forgiveness, and where the person providing support should be grateful for whatever scraps of respect they receive. I'm done with that world. Some bridges are worth burning, and some families aren't worth saving. I learned that sitting on a stool by the bathroom, eating food I'd paid for while being told I wasn't real family. And I'm never forgetting that lesson. The $4,200 was the best money I ever spent, not because of the party, but because it finally showed me exactly where I stood with these people. And now I know exactly where they can go.